What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz PLS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 400, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 82.5% screen-to-body ratio. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.8-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 386, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 84.8% screen-to-body ratio. So in general, both phones have really good displays, but each has a slightly different advantage. On one hand, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, this phone does have a 120Hz display versus the standard 60Hz display with the Moto G Stylus 5G, and this is going to make the movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're doing something like watching a video or playing a game where there's a lot of motion on the screen, or just navigating through the phone in general, it is going to feel a little bit more premium and things are going to be smoother and more fluid. So if you're consuming a lot of content, definitely keep this in mind. But on the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, as you can clearly see, this phone is a little bit larger at 6.8 inches versus 6.6 inches, and this also does tend to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content. Now in general, I personally would value having a larger display over a higher refresh rate, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to personal preference, and these displays are so similar that you're really not going to go wrong with either. Now for storage, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the Moto G Stylus 5G is getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now keep in mind, there are different variants of each phone. For example, the international version of the A23 5G is getting 128GB too, and the factory unlocked version of the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 is getting 256GB. But for the purpose of this comparison, these are the standard versions of these phones you're going to find at a US carrier, so definitely keep this in mind. But that being said, between these two, the Moto G Stylus 5G clearly has an advantage here. I feel like 128GB is definitely a great amount of storage for pretty much anyone. But on the other hand, with 64, while I personally don't think 64GB is really ideal, for the average user, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, it should be at least acceptable. But again, if you're more of a power user, if you have a lot of apps and stuff like that, then the Moto G Stylus 5G with 128GB is definitely going to be a better choice. And again, remember, both phones do have microSD card expansion as well, and this is great if you want to offload stuff like photos and videos. Now for security features, both phones have face unlock as well as fingerprint scanners. With the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, it's right here on the power key, so definitely a nice convenient spot, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, it's right here on the back. But starting with the A23 5G, let's go ahead and give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Moto G Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones do have face unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got a hole punch for the front facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, they're pretty much the same. Both phones have all the features you're typically going to find in a mid-range phone, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, then you're not going to go wrong with either phone. Now as far as quality goes, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G has a little bit of an advantage. They are really close, so the Moto G Stylus 5G is great too. But again, if you want the higher quality photos between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G will be a little bit better. Not by much, but it's still going to be noticeable. But that being said, in general, again, if you're taking a lot of photos, you want a wider variety of features, and you want your photos to look nice, but you don't exactly need the top of the line quality you might get with a flagship phone, either of these phones will be a great choice. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM as well, with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G 5G processor. And keep in mind with the Moto G Stylus 5G, if you're getting this phone factory unlocked, it will have 6GB of RAM instead. And kind of the same thing with the A23 5G. The US version of this phone you're going to get through pretty much any carrier does have 4GB, but the international version you get factory unlocked does have 6GB instead. Now that being said, as far as performance goes, these phones are pretty much in the same league. And that being said, no matter what you're doing with them, whether you're doing more basic activities like web browsing and social media, or more complex stuff like a little bit of mobile gaming here and there, you will get a pretty good experience either way. But that being said, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, while not being that much faster, is still noticeably faster than the Moto G Stylus 5G. So if you're going to be on your phone a little bit more, or maybe you're mainly doing higher performance activities like mobile gaming, in that case I would say the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G will be a slightly better choice. But again, the Moto G Stylus 5G is still not a slow phone, and while this phone, or either of these phones for that matter, are nowhere near as fast as a flagship phone, I do think the average user is still going to get a good experience. Now that being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and here are the scores right here. So again, as you can see here, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, while not being really that much faster, is still definitely going to have a significant performance advantage here. So again, if you do want the faster phone of the two, then obviously the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G will be the way to go. But again, if you're just doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, and you're not really going to be on your phone all the time, the Moto G Stylus 5G will still be perfectly fine. Now for the battery, both phones do have 5000 mAh batteries, so you can expect to get great battery life and longevity here. To put this into perspective, a 5000 mAh battery is pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, at least in the US. So again, if you want a phone that has great battery life, then either of these phones is going to be a great choice. Now that being said, their fast charging is a little bit different. With the A23 5G, we're getting 25W fast charging, whereas we're only getting 10W fast charging with the Moto G Stylus 5G. Now, I'm not sure how many people really care that much about fast charging, but if you do have a really powerful fast charger, and you do actually care about charging speeds, then you will be better off with the A23 5G, because of course, 25W fast charging is quite a bit more than 10 watts. But that being said, even with the Moto G Stylus 5G, I have noticed the charging speeds on this phone are pretty decent. So in general, again, if you want the best charging speeds, the A23 5G will have a bit of an advantage, but otherwise, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone. Another thing I feel like a lot of people probably already knew, that I do want to point out anyway, is that neither of these phones have wireless charging, so if that is a feature you were expecting, then keep in mind these phones again do not have it. And speaking of other features, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G does have NFC, whereas the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 doesn't. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, then for that the A23 5G will be a better choice. Now keep in mind, even though the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 doesn't have NFC, the 2022 model of this phone does. So if you do want a Moto G Stylus 5G, but you also want to use tap and pay, then the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is definitely a good choice. In addition to this, as the name suggests, the Moto G Stylus 5G obviously does have a stylus, whereas the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G doesn't. So if you do want a phone with a stylus, the Moto G Stylus 5G will be the way to go. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now in general, this is actually so similar that in a lot of cases, it's probably going to depend on what kind of deals you can get. Both phones have great displays, pretty similar camera setups, almost the same battery, and a lot of really similar features. Really the main differences here are, on one hand, the Moto G Stylus 5G has a larger display, quite a bit more storage, and again it does have a stylus, whereas with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, this phone takes slightly better quality photos, has better fast charging, and a bit better performance. So in general, depending on your preferences, it could really go either way. But honestly, depending on your carrier, if you can get one of these phones for free, I would probably just go for that one, even though each phone does have its own advantages. I feel like for the most part, they are really at the same level. So if you can get one for a significantly better deal, I would personally go for that. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for a solid mid-range 5G phone with a good display, a great camera, really good performance, a good battery, and a lot of nice features, you really won't go wrong with either phone. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.